The first annual Las Vegas International UFO Congress was proud to have been chosen to make the world premiere presentation of the Bob Lazar video. We are going to take a very long, hard look at the information contained in it. Now, first, we'll take a long look at Bob Lazar himself. We're going to make an honest effort to establish his veracity, but we will look at all evidence, both pro and con. Now, after this look at Bob Lazar, the man, we will look at the context of the evidence as we know it. But of course, it is each of you out there that must try to decide for yourselves what you believe or do not believe about Bob Lazar. We're taking this in-depth approach because we feel that to be exposed to the Bob Lazar video physics lesson without benefit of available background information is not the best way to evaluate his story. So, to begin at the beginning, let's try to go back to the beginning. Question. Just who, or some might ask, what is Bob Lazar? Is he a government whistleblower or a cosmic charlatan? But make no mistake about it, the Bob Lazar story is either the most important story in recorded history or the biggest disinformation hoax ever. Any serious inquiry into today's UFO phenomena will lead most rationally thinking people to the somewhat uncomfortable but incontrovertible conclusion that something is going on. Now, the evidence seems to suggest that we, the human race, are not alone in the universe. Many of us now believe that it is most probable that we have been continuously visited since the dawn of time. Now, common sense tells us that whoever or whatever is visiting us must be technologically advanced beyond our wildest imagination. But to go from rational acceptance of today's UFO phenomena to belief in the particulars of Bob Lazar's story is a long journey indeed. So, could it be true? Could Bob Lazar have witnessed alien technology power flying discs in the control of some agency of our secret government? Could he have actually worked hands-on with this alien technology? And if our government controls alien technology, could they keep this fact secret? Now, for Lazar to have worked on alien technology, our secret government must have it. I believe Stanton Friedman is right when he says,
"You go to a court of law with this, you'd have no trouble convincing a jury that indeed," now you don't have every little detail, as you never do, even in a criminal case.
A fat chance, you might say, the government is not about to let any of us visit the S4 site where Lazar claims to have worked. We just can't go there to verify what they're doing. And of course you're right. But what we can verify today is that they have had at least some alien technology in their possession since the Roswell recovery in 1947. Consider, in 1902, people could only look at birds and dream of flight. But just 45 years later, in 1947, we could buy a scheduled air ticket to fly almost anywhere in the free world. And in less than that 45-year period, the 22 years between 1947 and 1969, we had rocketed to the moon and back. And today, in 1992, coincidentally 45 years since the Roswell recovery, Bob Lazar's video tells us that he has seen functional alien discs, and he tells us how they work and where they came from. Now, some of us have been looking for answers to the UFO question for decades, so it's only natural that we want to believe Lazar. We've been waiting too long already, with the answers always just around the corner. So, courtesy of Lazar, here are the answers, or most of the important ones, neatly packaged and palatable indeed. And, oh, how we want to believe. Las Vegas, Nevada, entertainment capital of the world, site of the annual International UFO Congress, and the city nearest the super-secret government research facility known as S4, and home of Bob Lazar. He first came to public attention in May 1989 when KLAS TV news anchor George Knapp introduced his audience to a man identified only as Dennis. He broadcast Dennis's story on his on-the-record program. Now, what Dennis had to say was so extraordinary, it was rebroadcast on radio shows across the country and even on TV in Japan. Sometime later, George broadcast a 2-hour documentary on the UFO phenomena entitled UFOs: The Best Evidence. Now, this was a compilation documentary of both prior on-the-record information and new material. In this 2-hour format, the program was an exceptional success. Near the end, George talked about the secret government test center in the southwestern Nevada desert known as Area 51. Projects like the U-2 and SR-71 spy planes were shown, and stealth development was highlighted too. Then, some of the Dennis segments were repeated and topped off with the incredible disclosure of Dennis's true identity. Dennis was none other than Bob Lazar. And with this disclosure, Lazar became the first living witness to come forward with on-the-record testimony about secret U.S. government testing and development of alien spacecraft and technology. The details he revealed were nothing short of earth-shaking. Now here are the highlights of what Lazar had to say. This came from somewhere else. I mean, as bizarre as that is to believe, but I mean it's there. I saw it. I know what the current state of the art is in physics. It can't be done. Power sources and antimatter reactor. They run gravity amplifiers. There's actually 2 parts to the drive mechanism. But it's a bizarre technology. There's no physical hookup between any of the systems in there. They use gravity as a wave, using waveguides almost like microwaves. Right on the heels of this revelation of Lazar's true identity, the additional details about the program at S4, the specific sub-area within the greater Area 51, George Knapp followed up a few weeks later with an in-depth half-hour interview on his on-the-record program. Important new details were again revealed. Now, the last public statements on Lazar were released by George on his final UFO program. It was entitled UFOs: The Best Evidence? It was only broadcast in nightly segments, but again, important new information was revealed. Now you know just about everything that we knew about Bob Lazar at the time we began our investigation. Now, we could accept a lot of the story. We know the government has had access to some alien technology since '47, perhaps earlier. They must do their development and test work someplace. The Area 51 restricted area was real, and it is about as remote as any place we know of in the continental U.S. And for some reason, the government did an illegal land grab to extend its perimeter. So why not there? Now, we know the government has always used civilian scientists in all developmental testing programs. Why not Lazar? Why not Lazar indeed? Could we verify education? Maybe. But with the government's ability to expunge records, our failure to verify degrees could not by itself brand Lazar a fraud. Second thought, if he was brilliant and recognized as so, maybe a formal degree wouldn't be an absolute requirement to work at S4. So in pondering all the variables of this question, we recognize the biggest problem with the Lazar case. Indeed, the deeper that most investigators looked into Lazar's personal background, the more convinced they became that the whole story had to be lies. Now, we knew that with Lazar's known personal history, he would be the last personality profile on Earth accepted into the most super-secret program in history, a program, by Lazar's own testimony, multiple levels above the highest generally known security classifications. All the investigators said that Lazar absolutely would never be admitted into such a program. Why? Lazar's life almost reads like a romance novel, a brilliant and eccentric scientist to be sure, but one who did not possess any of the eccentricities that you might expect of a physicist. Rather, Lazar's eccentricities went into the area of fast cars and faster women, the fastest of both, jet cars and working women. In fact, during Lazar's first marriage, he owned, with his wife, a legal brothel in Nevada. Now, by all accounts, Bob loved his wife dearly, and after her tragic death, his interest in working girls, however, continued on. Now, please understand that no credible investigator will dismiss any testimony based on what the witness has done in other areas of life. But when a witness is accused of behavior that is considered by some to be immoral or antisocial, it impacts, however unjustly, on what they may say about anything, UFOs included. But the phenomenon knows no such human boundaries, and you may have a UFO sighting or encounter, be you president or homeless indigent. So, with Lazar's proclivities so well known, we felt that the only person that could have gotten him into this program was Edward Teller himself. Edward Teller, otherwise known as the father of the H-bomb, has been the head of most of our secret high-tech programs since the 1950s. Now, the truth is that if Teller wanted Lazar in the program, no one, including the security types, could keep him out. For in addition to being known as father to the general public, as in father of the H-bomb, within Teller's own programs, he was known as King Edward. Now, Lazar has always maintained that he had gotten to know Teller at Los Alamos. We believed him, but as with much of what Lazar says, where was the verification? Well, it turned out that to our satisfaction at least, it was there. In addition to the newspaper that linked Lazar's jet car article and Teller's speech at Los Alamos, off the record, Lazar shared with me a persuasive tape which inexorably linked Teller and Lazar. Now, after seeing this complete tape, I was absolutely convinced that the Lazar-Teller connection was real and that Teller was in it up to his eyeballs. Unfortunately, only a very short segment of this tape was included in the Lazar video. Just not enough of it to convince most people of the connection, but we believe it to be real and certain. Then there is the issue of Lazar's prior government employment. Sufficient evidence was able to be found to convince most that he had really worked at Los Alamos National Labs, but we could not say with certainty in what capacity. Now, the incredible thing is that while the Los Alamos lab was denying over and over any knowledge of Lazar's employment, and few records could be found because the government did such a great job making sure his records all disappeared, he continued to work there under a separate civilian contract. Now, we believe that he works there to this day. He holds contracts to maintain sensitive test equipment, we suspect maybe even designed or built by him for the lab, and is there regularly on behalf of United Nuclear. So we are convinced that he is for real in the respect that he did and does to this day work at Los Alamos. Another major point of proof was the W-2, the one that Lazar made public to prove his employment at the Department of Naval Intelligence. Now let's listen to Bob Exler's report on the Lazar W-2.
Well, in my investigation of the Bob Lazar, let me see if I can find my copy of the W-2 here, so that because I can't see too well what's up on the board. All right. First thing I did was check with the Postal Service regarding the address there, United States Department of Naval Intelligence, Washington, D.C. 20038. They were unable to identify the zip code at Postal Service. So I asked them, well, what happens if you get a piece of mail with that on, with that address and so forth on there? He says, well, typically it would be put in the box for the Justice Department, and then it would be routed to the appropriate intelligence agency. So I contacted Naval Intelligence, and they immediately identified the zip code as belonging to them, and they gave me an address in which to write to help evaluate the W-2. Basically, we were using a story that Bob was concerned about the accuracy, since he had received the W-2 rather late, and wanted to find out for exactly what period this particular W-2 covered for his tax purposes. So they were willing to work with us. In addition to that, I just learned yesterday from Gene Huff that John Andrews, head of Tester, who makes the plastic toys and models, who was trying to make some models of the Bob Lazar discs out at the test site, had corresponded using the address Naval Intelligence, NCOIC, Washington, D.C. 20038, and carried on a correspondence using that address. So Bill Moore is absolutely wrong in that, indicating that zip code is not valid. The next thing I did was contact the Internal Revenue Service. They directed me to the field office in Aberdeen, South Dakota, as a result of the first two digits where it says employer identification number 46-, that 4-6 ends up at Aberdeen, South Dakota. The results of that investigation, and I have it on tape, they said the W-2 is legit, and that's the term they used, legit. They also indicated, since we were trying to identify who the employer was by virtue of the employer identification number, that part of the investigation took us to Ogden, Utah, where all of the, that's the central office where all employer identification numbers are assigned. They indicated there that the employer identification number was not assigned by the Ogden Center, but was assigned by an intelligence agency, unidentified and classified. In other words, the W-2 is classified. They couldn't give us any more information on that. If you look up in the upper right-hand corner, where it says E-67222MAJ, I was able to find through the Department of Energy that that is a contract number, a Department of Energy contract number, which is what the E stands for. The 6722 represents a 6700 series contracts out of Kirtland Air Force Base. That's where the administrative office is. And MAJ represents the point of contact. On the Social Security number, I checked, conducted an investigation with the Social Security Administration in Baltimore, Maryland. With, I might add, Bob Lazar assisted in this by sending notarized statements to IRS, permitting them to release directly to me, not through him, results of the investigation. Same with Social Security. And the Social Security office found that there were no entries since 1983 on that Social Security account number. So Bob asked me to go back and check to see if they had entries for 1982 and 83, since he knew that the company that hired him to work at Los Alamos, a company named Kirkmeyer, and he still knew the amounts of money that would have been applied to the Social Security account number in 1982 and 1983. So we checked that. Sure enough, those amounts of money were in fact on his Social Security account number for 82 and 83. So I asked the Social Security office if they could identify the employer who paid those funds to Bob's Social Security account number in 82 and 83. So they had to go to a different computer system that tracks those numbers. And when they came back, they said, well, the first time we tried it, we got a security violation notice. So we tried it again, and we got a second security violation notice. I even gave them the name Kirkmeyer to look for. And before they went to a third attempt, the supervisor intervened and said, we can't do that. If we get a third security violation notice, the whole system breaks down, and they end up having to do a whole lot of paperwork. So they suggested that Bob go to his local field office here in Las Vegas and try to get the information pulled up on the computer from here. To my knowledge, that has not been followed up on, and the explanation was that Bob filed a formal request in writing for that information, and the results of that have yet to come in. But clearly the IRS claimed that this W-2 was legit. So any question regarding the issue of this particular document being bogus is pure hogwash. In other words, Bob Lazar definitely worked for the U.S. Department of Naval Intelligence in that time period, and that's the amount of money that he received for his trips up to the test site for that first period. Now, he continued working into the next year, as you know, and you'll hear more about that from Gene Huff, clearly. That covered, I think, what was it, just a couple of trips to the test site in December of 88, I believe. And then he went I think five times in 89 up through March. And he did not get a W-2 for the rest of that. In other words, they didn't send him a W-2. He's not yet received one for that period of time, and now we're coming up into 1992 for the 1991 tax year.
We also checked, where possible, into many of the things Lazar said on George Knapp's TV show. Some findings were interesting. It is reported that Lazar had been followed by the government in its attempt to frighten him into silence. It also became apparent that there had developed quite a friendship between Lazar, Huff, Knapp, and John Lear. Now, this is not so surprising, as Lazar, Huff, and Knapp are all very likable guys. And George had made no secret of the fact that the friendship developed. But we wondered just how John Lear fit into the situation. We found the group together at the grand opening of the expanded Little Ailey Inn. We found the John Lear angle of the story rife with potential. It was obvious that the government did not like what he was saying. Lear had been fired from his job as an airline captain because of his public UFO activity. At this time, the pressure on Lear was working, in that Lear had taken a back seat with his public position on the phenomena. So when Gene Huff first asked John for UFO information, he refused. But with a big house to make payments on, kids in college, and no current job, John needed a loan on his house. So when he found out that Huff was an appraiser, Lear could not resist making a deal with him. What Lear knew about UFOs in exchange for appraisal services from Huff. Now, from here, we will let investigative reporter Tony Pelham pick up the story.
Come up and appraise my house, and I'll give you copies of everything that I've got that you're interested in and talk to you. So Gene's great, can come right on. So Gene jumped in the car and come up, and he had Lazar tagging along with him.
Yeah, guess who was holding the tape measure, huh?
That was who was holding the tape measure, and Gene introduced Bob to him and everything, and now what I'm telling you is how I remember it from Gene's story and John's story. They both tell me the same story.
Okay.
And so they did the appraisal and all, and they got introduced, and so then Bob got a little more interested and started talking, and they started, John told them all about Area 51, but Lazar said, well, that's kind of bullshit, but I could try to check that out. At the time, Lazar claims that he was attempting to, sending out resumes or attempting to get back into some job, in some government job, like similar to what he did in Los Alamos and stuff. And so he claims that he had already been applying for jobs. And so it wasn't like he said to John, oh, great, I'll call Lazar and get a job out of Area 51 and check it out. According to my memory, the way they told me, it was in the works. And it had nothing to do with UFOs or Area 51 or anything. He had applied for a job out there.
Right.
And so it came through. And I think the way Bob tells it is that it didn't hurt the fact that he knew, Edward Teller. And then, we all confirmed the deal about him having met Edward Teller.
Right.
And then the film that Gene showed you over here, Teller doesn't say, yeah, I remember the guy, but, you can draw your own conclusion from that. But that's how, the job came through. Bob started going out there, and he was discussing it with Gene, and he was going up and talking to Lear and exchanging, information with him. And all that while, I didn't know about Lazar, but John was telling me, well, I've got this guy that's working out there, and this is what I'm finding out, and so forth. And then, I don't know whether, I don't think Lazar contacted George. I don't know. You'd have to discuss that with him as far as the time he actually went shaded on the air like that, in the shadow.
How did they first get together? And Lear has to be the common connector there.
Yeah, Lear connected them up, because by that point, Lear was pretty impressed with George, or at least he was loosened up to where he was thinking, well, maybe so, because when I went to see Lear, oh, yeah, you work for that rag down there, yeah, I've talked to reporters. But, Lear realized pretty soon that I was totally interested, that it wasn't, and so he got that way with George Knapp, and I'm sure that's how it happened. He was telling George the same thing he was telling me, and so then, George called me and says, well, we've got a guy up here, and you want to come up? And I went up there to the house, and we met, and Bob Lazar signed the guest book as he came in.
Mm-hmm.
And George was pretty doggone sharp, because when, Mary Lee said, I like to have everybody sign the book, he got there after Lazar, and he looked down, and it had been signed Bob Lazar. So George told me that, and then Mary Lee, talked to me about it. She had some concerns.
We must always be on the lookout for disinformation. It is the strongest tool the government has to help them hide the truth. It is fact that after any investigator comes to prominence, in other words, after people start listening to him or her, that their information and its source must be checked and double-checked. It is strange indeed that after Lear had come to public prominence, and after the government had, directly or indirectly, gotten him out of the public spotlight to some degree, that he and Lazar should so conveniently meet. Now, this information is nothing more than circumstantial, and no one believes more than us in synchronicity. Yet, what better time to introduce an irresistible story, one that at long last answered all the questions we have been asking for so many years. And government pressure or not, I do not know anyone who could sit on this story for long, certainly not John Lear. So, now you know much of what we know today about Bob Lazar the man. This is what we have at hand with which to try to judge the truth of his testimony and story. We are sure that Lazar believes he is telling the truth about what he says he learned at S4. But we also believe the government can condition any witness through intimidation and psychochemical indoctrinations to believe any story they want told. As well, we believe that the government could have easily slipped in its own explanation for very real phenomena that Lazar witnessed, while hiding the real operating hypothesis from him. Or we believe it is equally possible that Lazar is telling the entire truth and the government doesn't care because the story is just too fantastic to be believed, knowing that even if we believe it, the general public is too apathetic to ever do anything about it. But, of course, it is you who must decide where you will come down on this story. We hope we have given you a few more tools to help you arrive at your decision. Now, let's cover the details of the alien propulsion physics lesson as contained in the Lazar video. Even at the speed of light, we will never traverse interstellar space in a straight line from A to B. This method is too inefficient and fraught with problems, even if we could develop the technology. Interstellar travel is not accomplished at near light speeds in straight line travel between points A and B. In order to effectively traverse these distances, we must be able to harness the power of gravity, which in turn will affect space-time. We know that gravity distorts space-time by observable phenomena. We have observed the difference in the time on atomic clocks when they are near the Earth and distant from it. And we have observed the shift in heavenly bodies that should theoretically not be visible when they pass behind the sun, but yet we in fact can see them. So it is observable. We do know that gravity can distort space-time. The fastest way to travel between points light years apart is to distort the fabric of space-time itself with an intense gravitational field that, when properly focused, will bring these points together. The gravity A wave can be accessed and amplified only by using element 115. The nucleus of 115 is so dense with protons and neutrons that the gravity wave actually extends beyond the nucleus's surface, just microscopically, but enough so that we can gain access to it. Element 115 probably can't be synthesized and does not occur naturally in our galactic neighborhood, but probably does in other heavy star systems. In addition to being dense enough to allow a gravity wave to extend beyond their surface, atoms of 115 can be bombarded with additional protons. When this happens, an atom of 115 becomes briefly 116, and then immediately decays back to 115. But in so doing, it irradiates an antimatter particle. The antimatter particles irradiated from 115 are directed to collide with matter in a total annihilation reaction. The heat of this annihilation reaction is then converted to electrical energy with near 100% efficiency. Thus, almost unlimited power is available to amplify and direct the gravitational wave to distort space-time for interstellar travel. We will shortly join the questions and answers session for the world premiere presentation of the Lazar video. But first, please allow us to comment just a little bit more on disinformation. The most effective disinformation always contains the cornerstone of real, verifiable truth. It must. We suggest that you ask yourselves these questions about the Lazar video. What part of the story as a whole was already known before Lazar? In other words, verifiable already. And which part of the story was new with Lazar or exclusively from Lazar? Off-the-record stories from inside workers were being told of advanced, possibly alien craft being test-flown at Area 51. The public was reporting something with typical UFO-type flight patterns being seen over the area. It was known that this area was our most secret advanced flight test facility. Civilian scientists worked these programs. And the basic framework of the government Bible information, in other words, that aliens have been coming here and interacting with us since before recorded history, is accepted by most serious researchers. It was not unusual for investigators to find nothing amiss with the basic fabric of Lazar's story. So, what was new in his story? In other words, what was suspect? The new information was the specifics of alien propulsion. This is the heart. This is what we did not have prior to Lazar. Now, let's try to apply a test for disinformation. What might happen? What might be the results if I accept the Lazar version of alien propulsion? Well, I might assume that everything that I see and hear of that looks like or acts like or performs like a UFO is alien. I might not look for any other answers to the UFO propulsion question because I already have the answers. Even if my government acknowledges the existence of UFOs, I might still assume everything I see is alien. In abandoning my search for other viable power sources or answers to the physics of the phenomena, I will still be at the mercy of the government and the industrial complex. In other words, the existing power structure for my ability to remain free and mobile and for my understanding of the phenomena. From within this belief framework, I would be in no position to judge anything that my government said or did regarding the phenomena. So, in whose best interest would the above possible results be? Well, you're right. Certainly not in yours or mine. But I have to stress this. This does not mean that the Lazar video alien physics lesson is not true. Now, let's join the questions and answer session that followed the world premiere of the Lazar video.
We're starting to roll now, but we're going to have a moderator here, and we're going to try to bring some little bit of sense of order to this. Next question, please.
Yes, I have two questions. One question is, I'm curious if you could shed some more light on the aspect of converting this massive heat energy into electricity efficiently. That was brushed upon as a very important part of that propulsion system that is described. And my other question is, why didn't Bob stay here if he was here before to answer these technical questions?
Gene?
Because why he didn't stay here is he had a dinner date and he wasn't going to come to begin with, but I talked him into showing up. And the other part is the apprehension about the thermoelectric generator is obvious that when we convert heat to energy in a thermocouple device, there's a great amount of waste heat, and it's a very inefficient method of generating power. And he knows that, and that was a big apprehension he had. But again, this is the way the reactor works, and he said, you've probably seen him in interviews, for all practical purposes, it's magic. I mean, in addition to it converting the heat from a total annihilation explosion to energy, that means that in the center floor of a disk, there is literally many annihilation reactions going on and converting that heat directly into energy. And he's even spoken to other physicists about it, and that's one of the big puzzles. Again, he was indoctrinated into the program, and there are some very, there have been some questions about, well, how can you bombard 115 with a proton and have it release antimatter? Well, he thinks it fissions, and there are a lot of other differences in the particle physics. But again, if he didn't understand, if he didn't get into it deeply enough to be able to explain it to you as fact, he didn't comment on it. So he doesn't know how a thermocouple device can be near 100% efficient, as our most efficient thermocouple devices, I believe, are like 6% efficient. He doesn't know the answer to that question.
May I make a comment also?
Yes, Dr. Harder.
Any kind of a thermal engine must work on certain principles. You have not only to supply heat at a high temperature, but you have to get rid of it at a lower temperature. And it's very hard to believe that what was described has any connection with what we know about thermodynamics, heat engines, thermal cells, or anything of that sort.
And Bob Lazar agrees with that, by the way.
Bob, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just a point of logic relative to that. One of the things that became apparent in this DISC program, it does make a lot of sense that if you're generating an enormous amount of energy somewhere, that they selected the geometry of a disk because that's the most efficient way of containing a high voltage field, a high energy field, without getting something like a corona discharge. So in other words, just a step of logic, if you go backwards and say, oh, well, it's a disk shape, well, why? Well, because you're generating a lot of energy, and it kind of makes a little bit of sense to me. I don't know about you.
Any comment on that, Dr. Harder?
Well, there are many different shapes of UFOs besides the discoid shape, and perhaps they have something inside that indeed would satisfy that explanation. But I think we're getting too far into speculation.
Yeah, I have two questions. Number one, I was quite amazed how far the description of Bob Lazar, the film of the test flight of the sports model craft resembled to the famous Madeleine Rudolph UFO film taken in spring 1965 near Washington, D.C. And I would like to know if there are any plans that Bob Lazar possibly helps in the evaluation of film material we have of UFOs, because his vast knowledge, he is one of the very few people in the world who really know a lot about UFO technology. He can help us to explain the strange flight patterns of the objects, the strange phenomena we have. And this can help us to find out which films and pictures are logical and most possibly true, and which pictures are, just fantasy. And as I said, it would be great if Bob Lazar in the future could help to evaluate and to explain UFO photographs, especially films, not photographs, but more films, because this is no coincidence for me, but what he described resembled film. Number two is, in our investigation in the crop circle phenomenon in England, we met aerospace engineer Roy Dutton, who speculated that gravitation radiation could have caused the crop circle phenomenon. And I would like to know if there's any additional information about the capacities of gravitation radiation in the Bob Lazar material.
Well, to answer your first question, and Bob never projects anything, but if you take the space-time distortion information that he even gave in the Lazar tape, when you take a picture of something, I mean, we're talking about light being reflected, and since the space-time distortion actually spends it actually distorts the space-time that the light occupies, it bends the light, so there are a lot of ramifications of distorting space-time and light, especially when you're talking about taking a picture, you know, where light reflection is necessary. So I think once you understand the basic concept, probably your application of space-time distortion is as good as Bob Lazar's. I mean, the fact is it does happen. It happens to varying degrees, and you know, so certainly that could distort a picture of a number of objects.
Gene, I think that Michael may have been going at a little more direct point on that question. Does Bob intend to lend any assistance toward photographic analysis, I would assume toward types of discs, shapes, whatever, that he knows are real? Am I correct, Michael? Is this really what you're getting at?
He's done that.
Get on the mic and tell us.
You mean to review, you know, review historical pictures of discs and identify it as one that he saw? I don't think.
I think maybe
clarify your
maybe
question,
I should just point out that in answer to that question, Bob has been very cooperative in that regard, Michael, in a couple of cases, in fact. One involving Gulf Breeze, which, as many of you know, has become over the years somewhat of a controversial issue. Bob indicated in response to a comment that Ed Walters had made regarding the flight of a disc that he observed and videotaped. He indicated that the object seemed to collapse on itself. Well, when Bob heard that, without knowing anything else about the Gulf Breeze case, he was completely convinced that this guy had actually seen the technology at work, because this is in effect what he would have expected to see from an optical standpoint. So from that regard, that's true. I also heard, and I can't validate this, perhaps Gene can, but we heard Amari Rivera the other night from Puerto Rico, giving his account of his abduction aboard a disc. We saw earlier Jorge Martin present some photographs of a disc that was flying in the sky, and there were some F-14s flying around it. I was told that Bob saw these photographs and indicated that that was, in effect, precisely what he had seen at the test site. Whether or not there was enough information in the photographs, I personally have done a preliminary, I'll say, photo analysis on those pictures, and the size of the disc, I would say, is probably considerably larger than what Bob has told me is the size of the disc that he's seen at the test site. But nonetheless, the point being is that in answer to your question, yes, Bob has been cooperative in helping us look at that. And one other point that I found very, very helpful in evaluating, as many of you know, I'm a video analyst and have worked with NASA for a good bit of time now in analyzing UFO videos, not for NASA, mind you, but with their permission to use their facilities. One of the videotapes that were taken out at the test site, I believe in March of 1989, showed an object that, from an optical standpoint, looking at a videotape. Now, we take these videotapes and lock them down to 1/30th of a second, frame by frame. And what we saw was, in effect, a sewing machine image, meaning you see a dot or a dash of light, black sky, dash of light, so on across the screen. In trying to analyze that, and in doing quite a number of tests with video cameras, and especially with the work I did for 5 months there at NASA on the Gulf Breeze video, one of the things that I've learned is that it's damn hard to duplicate that sewing machine effect, even with all kinds of different types of tests. Now, we can equate with that a 60 cycle hertz frequency for street lights and things of that nature. We can identify twinkle effect from stars. But the only way I could describe or explain what I saw in that video from the test site would, or at least one of the ways, let's say, that one might explain the optical effect of that video would be with the way Bob has described this technology. Whether or not he has a solid understanding of exactly how these machines operate, or if he was somehow technologically misled, nonetheless, the basic description of what he has given with the technology can be explained in terms of that video. So yes, I would say he's been very helpful in a lot of ways to a lot of us who are trying to make sense of a very strange phenomenon we're confronted with.
Dr.
Okay.
Harder, do you have a comment on that?
I don't have a particular comment on that because I think a lot of things could be created in which the connections are made, perhaps lightly, perhaps not too lightly, between various things that are observed. I would make, I feel sometimes, I must confess, a little bit like Alice in Wonderland talking about this subject on this particular occasion. I might say a little bit about the ways of science. Truth is not established, the reputation of a scientist is not established on a democratic principle that he's telling the truth 90% of the time or 80% of the time. If a scientist is not telling the truth 100% of the time, he loses his credentials and no longer can find a job. So it may be that some of the people we're talking about today have been telling the truth 50, 60, 70% of the time. But which part of that 60% is true? Which part of it is not true? That we don't know. We saw a demonstration on the film of amplification, which was essentially no more than a gain control on an oscilloscope. If you're going to amplify something and get greater power out of it, you have to apply additional energy. The additional energy was explained by a technique of finding antimatter, creating it out of what? Out of nothing? Certainly we know in the universe there's a great sea of energy. Vladimir has referred to that. It's known as a zero-point energy. The quantum fluctuation of the vacuum, that's certainly well known. There's an awful lot of it. We just have never found a way of getting to it.
Next question.
Just a couple items. One is, I think one of the things that's pervaded through this whole conference to me, and I was at the Tucson one also, although I'm a novice in here, but I was in England at the Crop Circle Convention. And that is, that really what's needed here is a unification, and I like the term that several people have used of a new spiritual science. I think we need to get the two a little more together. And what we have is science and none of the effectual spirituality of the issue. And I don't think you can really separate the two into two separate issues. So that's just a comment. My question is, I wasn't at all satisfied with the answer about Bob Lazar not being here merely because he had a dinner engagement. I'm sure that all of us here would have fed him without any problem. So that certainly didn't satisfy my... There must be a little more depth. Surely you can add a little more depth to the answer to that question.
Can I just make a quick comment regarding that question?
Yeah.
Because this became a very significant issue with a number of the investigators who were trying to corroborate what Bob was offering from the very, very beginning. We had a great deal of difficulty with this particular issue that you're referring to. Right. Now, just let me point out very quickly that whenever we're confronted with a photographic UFO case, for example, one of the things that we first look for from a psychological profile with regard to the photographer is he looking for publicity in any way. In the case of Bob, he avoids publicity like the plague. The only time that he did not avoid publicity was when he was, in his own words, trying to save his own ass. When he first came out. And even then, he had his face blacked out and used a pseudonym on the TV. I think that the fact that he avoids the publicity should not be considered a negative in his favor, but in fact something that from a psychological profile should be expected from someone who is just trying to tell some information, but he doesn't want to get involved in it. He has avoided UFO researchers and groups like this like the plague. It took me 2 years. It took me 2 years to get him on the nationwide radio broadcast just to answer Dr. McAbee and John Brandenburg's questions.
I understand, okay. And yet we had him here for a full hour, so he didn't avoid it totally. So.
Well,
I mean, we had a presentation that he obviously was aware of being filmed.
You need to make sure that you want to hear his answers. You're alluding to spirituality, and there was a blatant absence of spirituality. This is all science. This is all reality. And that's one of the alarming things about the information there, that those with hopes of spirituality would be very dismayed by. There is no evidence of that whatsoever. It's cut and dried facts, and a lot of our everyone's philosophy is involved with the hope and the anticipation of events that are never going to happen, and that's why it's so alarming. He saw no evidence of any spiritual necessity whatsoever. It's hardware.
I certainly don't mean religion, so I just hope you understand the...
Yeah.
Well, if you can define spirituality, I mean, but I'm just saying there was no evidence of anything other than hardware, physics, space-time, metal, you know, reality.
Certainly in his video, I understand.
Right.
Now, Bob was invited, of course, for dinner, certainly. He declined that offer. He told me, shared with me, that one of the reasons that he made this program was to once and for all go on the record with essentially the complete story, to stop all the hounding and all the publicity. That's one of his main reasons for doing the work that we got to see tonight.
Which I might add was exactly the same thing that Ed Walters from Gulf Breeze did in writing his book, is he was tired of the constant commenting back and forth. He says, I'll put it down in a book, and then when somebody has a question, go read the book. That's where the answers are. That's all I can say about it because I don't know anymore, and I think this is what Bob...
That's a little more meat than that he had in dinner engagement, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
In addition to that, he's aware that many of the things he's saying conflict with mainstream science. If you have a room full of scientists who believe gravitons exist and they function or perform as gravity, what can Bob Lazar do to disprove them? I mean, the wave theory is considered, and he learned that gravity is a wave. And I think an interesting thing is if you don't feel comfortable with passing judgment on Bob Lazar's information, you might want to just file it and see where it applies. It's a big coincidence that he says gravity is a wave and we see evidence of space-time distortion. I mean, Earth scientists do. We see evidence of that. If you will apply the information, it makes sense, but you know, retaining skepticism, if someone is going to make up a lie, if you feel Bob was disinformed and I don't, obviously you have to examine that possibility. Did they create such a lie? For instance, if you can access the gravity A wave, why do you need to make up something like an antimatter reactor where it takes a total annihilation explosion and a little module and totally converts it to energy? If this is true and you could amplify the gravity A wave, well, if you were in space, you could carry a power source with you, you know, the size of some of the vehicles you see in science fiction movies. So, you know, sometimes we need to examine how far would someone go to disinform and to what end.
Dr. Harder, you have a comment?
Well, my good friend David Jones said that he could put this onto a computer network so it would reach all of the scientists and people who have knowledge of this sort of thing, and it would be easily evaluated by the scientific community. I think if this is indeed disinformation, that's exactly what would help a lot, because having been shot down by everyone who knows anything at all about physics would completely destroy all of the other kinds of evidence that they want to keep hidden and suppressed. So essentially putting on the network, Dave, would be doing exactly what the disinformers want to have done. I might make another comment upon gravity and gravitational waves. There is such a thing, hypothetically, as gravitational waves, and we do have people who are trying to detect them from collapsing stars. The amount of energy in a gravitational wave from a collapsing star system is so infinitesimal that the motion of a huge mass is in the order of many thousandths of a micron, very tiny. Gravity waves do not, except as a second order effect, produce any force. What we have here on Earth is a gravitational monopole, a big one, right? And there are such things as spin fields. They're infinitesimally small. Now, the fact that UFOs can get somewhere, apparently defying gravity, doesn't give us the license to believe that our representation of how it's done is the true representation. We just don't. It's better to say we don't know than to go out into fantasy land. Now, gravity waves, the gravity that we observe that keeps you in your chair right now is not a wave. A wave has frequency, wavelength, and a velocity, okay? It's not a force field, except it may be an interaction between a scalar field of attraction and what we'd call a spin field. That's a hypothetical construction that's been studied for 20 or 30 years at least. We've never actually made any practical application of it that anybody knows about. So again, one more thing that comes out in this video that's at complete variance with what everybody knows in classical, ordinary, or any kind of physics.
I'm going to comment right now.
Bob, your comment?
Hang on a second. I want to comment on that. I don't think you're suggesting that everyone in mainstream science absolutely that believes gravity is gravitons, are you, and that it's not a wave? And you are alluding to Bob Lazar also stated that we weren't able to learn much about gravity because we were incapable of generating a gravitational field. When you're speaking of moons, planets, things of that sort, Bob stated that those are weak gravitational fields, and the ramifications of all of this technology happens after the wave is amplified.
Well, two things can be opposed to each other, neither of which is true. In fact, what people have described as a gravitron, is a quantization of a gravitational wave, or essentially trying in some way to bring gravity into quantum theory. It's never been successfully done. Speaking of gravitrons as an opposition to a gravity wave, is opposing two things, neither of which have been observed, and either has some kind of a theoretical possibility. But to say that what we observe what keeps you in your seat is a gravitron or it's a gravity wave, neither of those things are true. Okay? Bob?
In defense of the implications of both sides of this issue, the one being that Bob is for some reason attempting to duck technical questioning, and in defense of Dr. Harder, who is offering some traditional scientific...
Defense, huh?
Pardon me?
Thanks, I don't need it. Defense, that is.
No, well, no, I'm in defense of the fact that Bob is not here for you to get satisfaction to the questions that you're legitimately offering. I would like to offer that I was able to get Bob to agree to an hour-long interview on nationwide radio with the Dr. Bruce Maccabee, Navy optical physicist, at my side at the microphone, and plasma physicist Dr. John Brandenburg. It was a very interesting hour. The conclusion to that hour was simply this, is that both of these gentlemen concluded that there was no feeling on their part that Bob was ducking any questions or even being untruthful in any way. But both of the scientists came away with the conclusion that there were many, many holes in Bob's technological evaluation of what he worked on. What the reasons for those deficiencies were, I really am not anywhere near qualified to answer. Bob acknowledged and recognized those deficiencies on the nationwide broadcast, and I'm sure he would recognize those deficiencies here in front of Dr. Harder if he was certainly here. I should also point out, in connection with that issue, that I raised the whole scenario of Bob Lazar working at the test site with Everett Heinemann, who at the time was the Deputy Director for Science and Technology at CIA. And that at the guidance of Admiral Inman. I found in response, following investigation of Everett Heinemann, his comment was, "I come to different conclusions than you do." I have no idea what he meant by that. But I leave that open because Dr. Harder pointed out earlier that although Bob Lazar may have worked at a test site, there is the potentiality, knowing the abilities of security to be able to trick virtually anyone. There are other modalities such as mind control that may have played some part in this. And although all of this is speculation, it may offer some answers to a very, very gray area in all of this. And I think we just need to realize is that we're left holding a really big bag. And unless we actually get one of these discs out here and can play around with it, maybe then Dr. Harder could offer some explanation as to how the dadgum thing works. And if I can make one other comment relative to the element 115 issue, is that the researchers, at least, who certainly are not qualified physicists by and large, who have grappled with this issue of how in the world could we possibly be dealing with element 115, which is an extremely heavy element, well beyond any college chemistry professor's knowledge of the element table. I offer a very recent article from August 1991, August 31st in particular, on New Scientist, Volume 3, number 1784, a paper offered by Walter Loveland and Glenn Seaborg regarding the search for the missing elements. And it indicates here researchers are trying to create exotic new super heavy elements, some of which could be relatively long-lived, but the task is proving more difficult than they thought. The reasoning behind this, from my understanding of reading the paper and based on some of my early background in architectural geometry, if you look at something as simple as a triangle, you know that that is a triangle is considered one of the more stronger geometric figures known. If you make that a three-dimensional triangle and add the extra faces to it, it becomes an even stronger geometrical figure. We've also learned recently with the things like new carbon atoms that if you create enough triangles so that you fill in a atomic structure a large sphere connected, it becomes a very, very stable element. And they have found an island of stability far out on the periodic charts, which is described in this article. And if anyone is technically interested in that end of it, the feasibility of elements all the way up through 118 are all described in here. And this is what they're working on now. So maybe it's not so far-fetched, the fact that Bob brings up something as exotic as element 115. And that's all I had to add on that.
Dr. Harder?
Bob, perhaps I can add something too. The speculation that there's an island of stability out there has been, that speculation is at least 20 years old.
Okay.
And so it's not surprising that someone would be able to pick that up. But I really think we ought to get to one of the next questions.
Next question.
Yes, sir. What is the names of the elements 114 and 115?
They haven't been named, according to this paper.
If you discover them, they'll name them after you.
Next question, please.
Thank you. Why do you suggest to go to look at the skies and wait? Is it an intelligent question?
Well, I could say, if the question is, do you want to see a disk fly?
Yes.
I could offer one suggestion, and that is go to Gulf Breeze, Florida. Perhaps a 3-day weekend there, and you'll certainly have as high an opportunity as anywhere on the planet to get a first-hand visual opportunity. As far as the best times and locations to go take a look here in Nevada out towards the test site, I'll put that up to Gene Huff.
Well, when we saw the disc tested in 1989, that was with Bob's foreknowledge that a test was going to take place. And we had, at different times, we had an 8-inch and a 10-inch telescope. So, you know, I don't think anyone with any brains would still be testing on Wednesday nights, and I certainly wouldn't be flying on the east side of that valley so people could see it from the road or the highway. So, I don't know, and there are a lot of different vehicles. There are a lot of things going on out at Area 51 and south of there at S4, so I don't think that all of the lights that are seen out in the sky over central Nevada are flying discs, and I wouldn't suggest you go out there and wait for one to fly by either.
Thank you.
Next question.
And don't start any fire.
Yes, there are a lot of self-proclaimed physicists and experts in this room, and a lot of scientists, and a lot of backbiting and bickering here tonight from self-proclaimed experts. I'm wondering if we could possibly suspend our disbelief for just a moment and entertain the fact, or entertain the thought of what if what Bob Lazar is saying is true? What are the sociological implications of a power source this profound, being in the hands of one of the arguably most sinister and destructive forces ever known to the human race, the United States government?
Wonderful question.
And how do we feel about possible antimatter experiments being done not far from here beneath the floor of the Nevada desert, along with the nuclear bomb testing that's already being done? How do we feel about a technology such as this being akin to being machine guns in the hands of monkeys? Can we entertain this thought for just a moment?
Who wants to take it?
I think before someone asked the question, why did the project break up and why did the aliens en masse leave, and I think you've just hit it on the head. I don't know that we were able to be trusted with the type of technology. You know, if this element 115 exists and it releases antimatter on proton bombardment, would you trust a bunch of human beings with it? That's a good question, and that's a good point. And I think all of this that he read in these reports are true, I think the beings agreed with you, and that's why the program came to an abrupt halt.
Dr. Harder?
Well, I think that the existence of various kinds of beings and the interaction with human beings is very speculative, and I certainly agree with Dina that it's very frightening to believe that these technologies could be in the hands of the U.S. government, but I rather imagine that the existence of these technologies is more of a fantasy than it is a reality.
Bob,
especially the antimatter part. Yeah. But I agree with her that it's a serious problem if true.
Thank you. Bob?
Well, a somewhat relevant comment to that, perhaps. One of the things I was disappointed in with regard to the video that Bob offered was any relevant comment regarding some of the other areas that he has heretofore spoken of regarding things like the aliens claiming to have created Christ, references to things like Armageddon, which certainly ties in nicely with the young lady's query. I was hoping he would have included something along that line. Maybe Gene would be good enough to enlighten us on some of those areas that Bob had talked about. The reason, I should add, that the reason Bob probably didn't include it in the video is because, as he pointed out very clearly, that the second part of that video, he had no way of corroborating any of this material. This was just, you know, words on paper that he had read. But I think it's important to note, since we've heard from so many abductees and other sources in the paranormal phenomena, many of the same types of claims, I think it's imperative to note that these are words that Bob read out there at the test site. If maybe Gene can be a bit more specific on some of those things.
I'm not aware that he ever read anything about Armageddon or any world coming to an end or anything like that.
Was there anything like what about the project with the crystal, explosions, things like that?
I'm not aware of any crystal explosions. I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about.
Looking into the crystal, was that part of the Looking Glass project or something?
I don't think so. He did nothing but read about Project Looking Glass, so he doesn't know if it exists. It's interesting that they would specify that it was about the physics of seeing back in time, not traveling back in time, and or Project Sidekick, which was a beam weapon, which could be focused by a gravity lens, but he wasn't personally involved with any of that, and I'm not aware that he's ever made any comment on that.
What about the comments regarding the aliens claiming to have created Christ, some of the theological implications? Any of that?
I don't think he said that they created Christ. I mean, that there was verbiage on the external corrections and extensive information in those reports on that, but keep in mind how Bob read this. He would be taken to this room, and we're all at the mercy of what he read in these reports, which he put a disclaimer on in the second part of the tape. So, you know, the United States government has the in-depth information on that, and anything that he just read a sentence or an excerpt on as he was paging through, he doesn't care to comment on. It would be taken out of context, and he didn't know, even if it wasn't taken out of context, if it would be true. So the point was, it sounds to me like if this information exchange took place, since they mentioned photographic evidence of the Earth over 10,000 years old. Well, 10,000 years is a peculiar figure. It sounds to me like someone was having a creationist, evolutionist debate. And their point was that the Earth was definitely created was here more than 10,000 years ago, but considering what the state of the art of special effects is in Hollywood, no one could show any of us a video or a hologram or anything that would prove beyond a reasonable doubt something had historically happened. That's impossible. That may be another reason that we were given the technology. If you do, you can't land and expect someone to disregard everything they believe and believe everything you believe. It's possible we were being given the anti-gravity propulsion and interstellar travel capability possibly to play Star Trek ourselves. If they tell us they're from Zeta Reticuli, I guess unless we can go there and verify that, why would we believe it? So they have to, if you put yourself in the government's shoes, they were between a rock and a hard place too. Their insinuation is that everybody can stop looking for the missing link, that the reason man is Homo sapiens sapien is because there was an external catalyst and it wasn't a direct line evolution, and it sounds like that there was probably a discussion to that effect going on.
Next question.
Yes, gentlemen. I'd just like some clarification, please. It seems as if the technological part of this tape, if I understand it correctly, deals with the technology that was exchanged or given or however it came about, that actually limited man within his own realm, didn't give him any real accessible material to use, and perhaps just gave him some tools that may serve to damage himself and not really extend outside of the universe. Is my interpretation of that correct or incorrect?
I don't know what their motives are, but yeah, when these beings, allegedly left, we did not have all of the technology, and we began the back engineering. If you're wondering why we have those discs, Bob said in the tape that the element 115 depletes very slowly, and it can be used in a disc for 20 to 30 years. Well, actually, it lasts beyond that. The insinuation is that the government made that the discs only withstand the stress for 20 to 30 years. So it kind of looks like there are a lot of cars that would run and you could learn to drive on, but they wouldn't pass emissions and you couldn't drive them from here to New York City because they'd break down. That might be the discs we have, that they've spent their part of their useful economic life, and it's possible they're not even capable of interstellar travel.
Yeah, well, is it correct then to say that the technology that the government actually had their hands on was rather limited and really didn't give them anything that would encourage or allow them to be outside of their own area?
Well, I think gravity propulsion would certainly have given man the capability to do a lot of things that he can't do now. So, but it would be conjecture. I can't project what their motives were. And again, Bob read this in reports. I mean, that this is under the assumption that all of this actually happened. So I don't know.
Okay. The other thing was, well, this is from his technological experience that he experienced himself.
But you also should realize that although they maybe gave them a car, they also gave them an awful lot of gasoline. So it's not like they just gave them a car with no gas. So
am I correct
the tools
in
are there.
saying that the gasoline that they gave them, it seemed as if I heard that it does not take them outside of
the limitations are not because of the fuel. The limitations are because, primarily, I would suspect, because either because of humans, or maybe it's got something to do with biology, but more likely it's probably because of lack of technical know-how.
Okay, so you think the physicality of the technology given may have been usable to go outside of man's own realm, and that it's perhaps the technology itself that man has that wasn't.
Well, I think you have to look at it like this. If you lived in a relatively uncivilized tribe out in the jungle somewhere, and somebody came along and dropped in a Porsche 911 and gave you the keys and a full tank of gas, you probably couldn't do too much with it for a while, but eventually you're going to figure out how to operate it. And eventually, somewhere way down the line, you probably will figure out how to duplicate it, given enough time and enough ingenuity. And I think that might be more apt to describe the situation that we've been in for, what, 4 decades, if that's really the case.
Right.
Regarding.
And just a yes or no answer. So the technology that the government has at this time is limited.
I can't answer that.
That would be a reasonable implication because of the very, very high technology that some of the ET groups have demonstrated. For instance, over Memphis, Tennessee, several police officers, members of a SWAT team, observed a craft that was the shape of a triangle, large enough that it overhung 2 high-tension towers. And as they watched it, a little red light came on behind. We could speculate whether it's a LED or if we wanted to. That's the sort of thing we're very fond of speculating on. But whatever the red light did, the thing took off and went 25 miles in 1.5 seconds. The craft was larger than a football field.
Okay. The other area of clarification is that this tape is devoid of any kind of spirituality. Is that correct?
I don't think that was his intention.
No, not his intention, but I mean just, okay, and it seems as if what's projected here, although it's just projecture, is that there was one particular group, that of what we know as of the Greys, that was the place of information, or the group that the government was associated with as they fed it to him, or the information that they fed to him.
Well, there was no proof or evidence of the presence or absence of spirituality. Therefore, you know, Bob
No, I'm just saying it wasn't shown at all in this tape. It was not addressed.
Spirituality?
Yes, it was very concrete, scientific,
right,
and technological.
Right. That was, you know, that's what he was exposed to, and that's all he can tell you he knows. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but he saw no evidence that it did.
Well, can anyone comment then on, this is the last thing.
By inference, however, you should note that what the film did implicate, almost by inference, was that the technology was obtained, or at least the originators of the technology was most likely the Greys, since they were the only ones that were referenced in there.
Okay, so I'm correct to assume that.
I would presume so, because of the inference and the lack of any mention of any other type of aliens or other types of technology. It also probably should point out is that one might also, through the same rather loose set of rules of data, might agree somewhat with what Gene said, that the technology or the disks up at the test site are probably of a lower technology than what we're seeing in a lot of the evidence we're getting from places like Gulf Breeze. If you were to take into account some of the things, like if there's 3 gravity wave amplifiers, if that's what it is, involved in these disks, and we see photographs of craft from down in Gulf Breeze that appear to have something on the order of 6 similar type devices. If that's true, and again, this is very, it's very speculative because we don't know what we're looking at. We're making wild guesses here, but one might speculate from that data that what we have is somewhat less technologically advanced than what we're seeing out in the field that's most likely being operated by non-humans.
Okay, like to ask for one last comment from you. It seems that I learned during this Congress that many other countries have different contactee experiences, and that the bulk of the so-called Grey contact experience does exist in this country, and seems to be of a more abductee negative nature. And the exchange of technology seems to be of a lower level. Can anyone comment on the reality?
Dr. Harder? Yes, I think you're right that many people do believe that the Greys predominate here in the United States. My own investigations are quite different from that. I do remember talking to a woman in New Jersey a year or so ago, and in hypnosis I asked her, well, what do these creatures look like? Oh, they're one of the little Greys. Then I used another technique to try to get closer to what she actually perceived, and when she looked at it carefully, it was an entirely different type of person than the little Greys. In fact, it was a type of alien that I'm more or less familiar with. And so I think there's a bias, a sampling bias, perhaps produced in part by the expectation on the part of the abductee, the expectation on the part of the hypnotist, and that evolves into a kind of a uniform reporting. Now also I might add that in the United States as well as elsewhere, if you look carefully at the entire phenomenon, you find about 90–95% of the abduction close encounter cases, I don't know whether abduction is the best word, tend to be not remembered at all. And it turns out that the more benevolent, the more what you might call spiritually developed, if you like, type of extraterrestrials are the ones that you'll never hear about. And the ones that you do hear about are these what you might call lower technology, perhaps lower evolved. They're perhaps a little bit better evolved than humans, but perhaps not much.
Well, on that note, I would just like to say that I hope in the future science will be much more receptive to the spiritual in nature contactees of a higher level. From my own experience, that kind of contact is more abundant than publicized because it's not always in line with our own scientific expectations, and it's more difficult to prove in research. And I'd just like to say that I hope that that avenue of experience will become more open. Thank you.
Next question, Michael.
Dealing strictly with the facts and looking at this dinner tonight, which was supposed to be targeted strictly on this premiere of the tape and evidences and discussions about the tape, I would like to know who was working with Bob Lazar on this project, because there had to be a project leader, there had to be other people involved in the work that he was doing, and if Bob Lazar chose to come forward to air this point of view and to give this revelation about this discovery, then why hasn't he, and I don't know if he has or he hasn't because you can answer this, hasn't he as a scientist substantiated at least the fact that he could name names of other individuals that could help substantiate what he's saying? This project must encompass somewheres, I would imagine, of thousands and thousands of consultant personnel. I mean, certainly the man knew or knows at least a dozen or 24 people that he's worked with. And wouldn't this be, this is the second part of the question, and wouldn't this be the most logical way for him to substantiate, number one, that he was on the project, number two, that other people saw what he saw, and number three, and most importantly, that the conglomeration of all these people coming forward, and hopefully he's the one that's now kicked open the door, would once and for all create some kind of action that would take this out of the hands of the military and cause some kind of inner cleansing situation.
Bob has named names. He named Dennis Mariani, who was in charge of security, the physicist who trained him, Barry Castellano, whatever that is. There was another gentleman, he didn't know his last name, was Rene. And the problem is, out at this place, they worked in teams, and Barry was the physicist that indoctrinated Bob. And there was heavy security. There were, automatic weapons on him. Even if you went to the bathroom, there were automatic weapons. So you didn't go to the lunchroom and say, hey, did you see that? They worked in pairs. He did name names. Again, other than Dennis Mariani, he never saw these people except out in central Nevada. George Knapp, considered doing things like, waiting outside of EG&G and getting license plates and seeing who flies out and who flies back and when and why, and see if you can match up any names. And but who knows? They don't have to all have to fly from EG&G here in Nevada. These people could be from California, Arizona, any surrounding states, and flown in there. And that's also if their actual names were used. I mean, we don't know. But he did name the names he knew, and he did not know a group. He didn't know dozens of people. There were only 22 scientists in the program when he entered, and there were 4 being upgraded to that point in time for a total of 26. And right at the end of 1988, we had made some discovery. There were some Russians involved out there. I don't know what we were showing them, but we made some discovery, and instead of sharing it, we made the Russians exit from the program. And another gentleman that was in the program out there didn't show up for work one day, and so they gave Secret Service protection to the 22 people that were already in. The people that were being upgraded, like Bob Lazar, were caused to carry weapons to and from work, just from their homes to EG&G and from EG&G back home.
Open mic, ladies and gentlemen. Who's got a question?
Let's quit. I'm tired. I'm ready to go to bed.
Okay. Thank you all for coming, and I hope it's been a worthwhile evening. Good night.
So, what do you think? The only part left to comment on is Lazar's glimpse into what he calls the government Bible. In his video is just enough information to help explain, or maybe we should say excuse, the government actions to date regarding UFOs. Now, Lazar says, what if the government was operating with information you and I don't have? Well, of course they are. But now that you know this too, do you think you might be inclined to excuse government actions which we mere mortal citizens cannot possibly understand? So maybe you will not question the government so much and maybe get a better night's sleep too. Well, maybe we can talk about a bridge later, or maybe some land in Florida. Most of the really meaningful things from the briefing papers Lazar read have not been included in his video. We will continue to respect this unreleased, off-the-record government Bible information that Lazar shared with us. But we hope Lazar will eventually just get off the middle ground and go public with all that he claims to have learned. Yes, full disclosure might cause his story to be dismissed out of hand. And I agree with him when he says that most of this additional information is so volatile as to be dangerous. But I do not agree with him when he says that its release can serve no useful purpose or that it might endanger national security. To remain silent while bureaucrats and industrialists operate beyond the reach of our elected officials and outside the confines of the Constitution of the United States is, to this reporter's mind, the only true danger to national security. We can only hope and pray that some others who have been in or who are in this alien technology research program at S4 or other illegal secret government programs will come forward with hard evidence of what is or is not really going on. Those who come forward may well be the new heroes in our future history books. Thank you all, and good night.